Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's our 5th episode, and this is a safe place to be unashamedly and unapologetically social conservatives. Now, you can watch on our website, familyfirst.nz. You just go to our website, go to the homepage, and scroll down, and you'll see the feed actually happening there. You can also watch on our YouTube channel, which is Family First NZ, or on our Facebook page. And if you're on Facebook or YouTube, well, bonus, you can share your comments to the panel and submit any questions you may have. Now, topics tonight include, is the National Party cancelling real down-to-earth Kiwis from being candidates for Parliament? We have some discussion on the education policies of the major parties, the results of a recent and interesting survey which was done on the perception of media bias amongst the main media outlets in New Zealand. It's an interesting comparison. And if we have time, we may touch on a disturbing new report from a UN group relating to the age of consent for sex. We're also going to find out the news media of choice from each of the panellists, so they'll recommend where you should go for your news supply. So without further ado, it's welcome to our panel, and it's a little sad today because both our female panellists are unavailable. So the average IQ of the panel has plummeted, as well as the looks. So pretty sad. Actually, I was just interested to see this comment come through. And it says, nice haircut, Bob. What happened to Ronji?
Look, I'm auditioning for the Labour and the National Party. I'm trying to get a job, so I needed to cut my hair off.
Okay, well done. Okay, now we are going to get straight into the free speech moment. And guys, I can say guys now because it's sort of just a guy panel today. I want to say that actually preparing a 90-second free speech moment is actually a bit of a test, trying to get it right down to that time so you don't get that dreaded, you sort of sit there panicking that it's going to suddenly jump up. So anyway, I have a new, and I appreciate the amount of work that you guys go to actually get it down to 90 seconds for free speech. So I thought we would do it alphabetically today, and that means, according to my records, it's going to be Alfred, you're going to kick us off, and your topic is standing on the shoulders of giants, and so your 90 seconds starts now.
So I had an interview today, and it was just with the Radio 531 PI. It was talking about the celebration or the commemoration of the Anzac weekend that's coming up, that's tomorrow. One thing I talked about was the amazing stories of our Pacificist soldiers who went to war. It was the culture, it was the language, there were challenges that they faced, yet despite that, they were able to succeed. The question then that was asked by one of the members, the interviewees, was that what can this generation learn from those stories? And for a moment there, I began to think, and I realized actually what we can learn is that there's that statement we make, standing on the shoulders of giants. And I said to them, look, we can learn from those pioneers who've gone before us, that they had to face incredible odds that were against them. Like we said, it was about culture, it was about even the weather, it was about the diets. Look, there were funny stories where they couldn't even fit boots, where they used to live in an environment where they used to have bare feet and jandals. So they cut holes on the side of their boots. Yet despite that, despite all of the things that were against them, even discrimination, where they were just seen as being good for sort of carrying water and supplies, they stood. And our role as this generation is to stand on the shoulders of these giants. And we do them an honour when we choose to be the best in who we are. We remember their sacrifice in their story when we say we don't settle for second best. We stand on their shoulders when we say that we will do and be who we are to make them proud and us proud of who we are as Pacifica people.
See, the ladies aren't here to tell me off, so I can sort of expand it a bit for us guys. We're all in this together. Well done, Alfred. Thank you for that. Moving to Ashley, and Ashley, your topic is it all could have been so different, and your 90 seconds starts now.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. When I think about the damage that this government's done to our country over the past 5+ years, it's sad to think that it could all have been so different. In the 2017 election, the National Party under Bill English thumped the Labour Party, led by Jacinda Ardern, with 46% of the vote to Labour's 35%. So Labour was hardly swept to power as per the mythology that subsequently developed. In fact, the national result was so far ahead of the vote achieved by the left that it was higher than the votes of the Labour and Greens parties combined. But we all know what happened next. Driven by hubris and personal utu, Winston Peters ignored the wishes of the country and the convention of Parliament and instead opted to go with a party that simply didn't enjoy popular support. The carnage resulting from that short-sighted decision is evident for all to see, but imagine where we'd been now if Peters had followed the will of the nation. English as Prime Minister would almost certainly have handled the early stages of COVID in much the same way as Ardern, but would have opened the country up much sooner when it became obvious that COVID was nowhere near as serious as expected. His internationally groundbreaking social investment program would be 9 years in, would be producing real results for the disadvantaged and vulnerable. The nation's finances would be in far better shape as English wouldn't have embarked on an unrestrained orgy of wasteful spending. Crime wouldn't be out of control. The prevailing culture of envy and division would never have gained a foothold. Wokeism wouldn't be rampant throughout the public service, and we wouldn't be afraid to speak our minds and exercise our right to free speech. Instead, look at what happened. It could all have been so different.
Very good. Thank you, Ashley. Right. Bob, you are next. And your 120 seconds, your 90 seconds, starts now. The Growing Up in New Zealand longitudinal study is New Zealand's largest ongoing study. It's based at Auckland University and it just received a $19 million boost from the government. Its research could have significant value, but it's been captured by gender activists. The children have all just turned 12 and the latest survey asked 12-year-olds, thinking about who you are, do you see yourself as a boy, a girl, or somewhere in between? Now, do you see yourself as a boy or as a girl? What does that even mean? Does it mean every Sunday? Does it mean every second day, once in a blue moon? Who knows? It's deliberately vague. The response options, boy, mostly boy, somewhere in the middle, mostly a girl, girl, I don't know. And yet, based on this guesswork by 12-year-olds, a category of trans, non-binary and cisgender are created. But what really disturbed us more is that the study started asking these questions not at 12 years old, but at 8. 8-year-olds were asked, do you see yourself as a boy, girl, or somewhere in between? And then they were asked, thinking about other people, do you think they see you as a boy, a girl, or somewhere in between? These are 8-year-olds. Parents were not asked these questions about their own children. Now, after raising this issue last week, I was approached by 2 families over this weekend who are part of the study who agreed with our concerns and had already decided they were dropping out of the study. Sadly, gender ideology and activism is destroying an important study and deterring families from being involved. Excellent, Bob. Fantastic timing. Well done. Let's move on to Bruce. And your topic, Bruce, is the ignored worldwide persecution of Christians. And your 90 seconds starts now.
Well, I'm not ranting tonight, I'm lamenting. If we were to rely on mainstream media, we wouldn't know that in 2022 Christians suffered persecution more than any other religion in the world. By the most conservative account, according to Open Doors watch list, every day 30 Christians are killed because of their faith, every day 12 churches or Christian buildings are attacked, and every day 12 Christians are unjustly arrested or imprisoned. Another 500 are abducted, and that's what we know about. I'm willing to acknowledge that their Christian roots, or embarrassed by them, Western governments ignore the persecution. They've forgotten that the history of the West is history of Christianity. Frequently, Christians are ignored, even persecuted in refugee camps. Western governments and mainstream media think that Christianity is an annoying old aunt, best kept locked up in some old people's home. She might let the cat out of the bag. They deliberately forget that she has the key to the front door. They think that their fairy tale utopia is a satisfying substitute for the pilgrim celestial city. I quote that 18th century romantic poet Wordsworth, "Whither has fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? Neither the glory nor the dream can be found in the mundane, boring, contentious, legalised fiction of politicised and politicising identity, which would drown justice and cut compassion at its roots. Such a fatal conceit will make it questionable that we'll ever again understand why we should love God and our neighbour as ourselves."
That was excellent, Bruce. They're fantastic, top of the class. And Ronji actually said, well said, Bruce, a topic close to my heart, re-persecution. Actually, just while I'm doing some quick topics before we move on to our last one, Ronji Charmaine said, have we got that? The leader really matters. I think that's in relation to what you had to say, Ashley. And Fale, in response to my one, I think said that is crossing the line, the parent line. That's right. And Claire said $90 million. Seriously? No, it's 19, but $19 million of taxpayer funding, which, yeah, is a concern. Right, last but not least is Ronji. And Ronji, tonight you are also talking about sacrifice, and your 90 seconds starts now.
Cool, thanks, Bob. I just want to gratefully thank all those who have fought for, protected, served and died for this nation. At this time of year, with Passover and Easter, and then followed closely by Anzac, I often think about this idea of sacrifice. I think this idea of sacrifice and sacrificial living has been lost in today's modern world that's consumed by materialism, secularism, and selfishness. We've been living in bubbles way before COVID, and this government forced us into these bubbles and lockdowns. Today's world is driven by the cult and religion of me, myself, and I. Speak my truth. It's my right. It's how I want to identify myself. It's my views that matter, and those who disagree with me are racists, bigots, homophobes, transphobes, or whatever other phobe is the outrage flavor of the month. For me, Jesus Christ and his sacrifice on the cross embodied all that is beautiful, true, and amazing with this idea of sacrifice. The Apostle Paul paints it beautifully in 1 Corinthians 5. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed for us. And in Anzac, remembering the sacrifice and selflessness of those past, present, and future in the armed forces, hopefully this would remind a selfish, me-centered, materialistic society that sacrificial living, sacrifice still has a place in modern New Zealand.
There we go. I can't believe it. I've noticed that since the women haven't been here, we have just been completely well behaved and in time. So well done, guys. And let's continue. Let's get straight into our topics. And look, I think maybe next week we might talk about just what's going on in the Green Party and the little bit of factional issues that are going on and the infighting. But I want to concentrate actually on the National Party. Now, look, we're familiar with Simon O'Connor, his post on Roe v. Wade. We remember Maureen Pugh getting rebuked for questioning climate alarmism. We also saw in the media recently Greg Fleming getting in trouble because he made some relevant points about what happens when you redefine marriage and you change the rules. And then there was this tweet, if we can just put that up, Gordon. Joseph Mooney, now he was blasted for comments he made claiming that every single person in New Zealand is guaranteed tino rangatiratanga sovereignty under the Treaty of Waitangi. And one academic described the comments by the Southland MP, who's also the National Party's treaty negotiations spokesperson, as an utterly incomprehensible interpretation of Te Tiriti. And he was suitably chastised by the party. And Alfred, we might come back to you on that one shortly. But the most recent one is National's ex-candidate for the Taieri electorate, Stephen Jack, and he had earlier come under fire for sharing a video in 2020 of a comedian, and it contained a very inappropriate and crude joke, and he rightly apologised for that. But then he resigned after Stuff reported he'd shared a poem on Facebook in 2021 comparing the former Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, to Hitler. Well, that's what the media said. Now, I'm pretty sure there'd be universal condemnation from the panel for the grubbiness and the complete unacceptability of the so-called joke. But I'm more interested in the panel's reaction to the poem which he shared and which sealed his fate. The media didn't like the poem because it referred to Hitler and Jacinda Ardern in the same breath. It called Jacinda Cindy, and it made a nasty joke apparently about David Parker, who was the Environment Minister. Now, just a little background. The author of the poems is a Balclutha farmer, Ross Agnew. And the farming show's Jamie Mackay, who's on the ZB network every day, called him a bush poet, earthy artisan, and a good Kiwi bloke. Now, just to give you an idea of his humour and artistic ability, the South Otago farmer is known for his protest song Fart Tax Blues, which became a hit in 2003 when it was played on the farming show, and then it was picked up by television shows including Homes. And it was a protest song about the government's proposed fart tax, and it struck a chord with farmers. Let's just watch one verse of that. And you can sing along to it as well, team, if you want.
Tossers up in Wellington, well, this time they've gone too far. It's not factories causing emissions or the humble motor car. They say it's flatulence from our livestock and we've got to take it part. And they've signed up with Kyoto and they're gonna tax the fart. That's why I'm sitting down here in my wool shed. I'm staring at my shoes, cause I've got those far tax blues.
Okay, so he's pretty creative. Let me just give you the second verse as well, because I'm getting into this and I can see you guys are as well.
Well, there's tons of gas, he reckons, from every Kiwi farm. So I followed around me flock, a fartometer on me arm. Well, I never heard one squeak all day. I wasn't very smart, cause my sheep are all female. And of course ladies never fart. That's why I'm sitting down here in my wool shed. Shouldn't have to pay my dues, cause I've got those fat tax blues.
Instrumental.
Yeah, I got the blues, baby. I got those fat tax blues. Yeah, hey Helen, I got the blues. I got those fat tax blues. That's why I'm sitting down here in my wool shed. Shouldn't have to pay my dues, cause I got those fat tax blues. Yeah, baby.
Wait for it, wait for it.
Hey, Pete, pull my finger.
So if
Okay.
anyone's just tuned in, Bob, I wonder what they're thinking.
What they're thinking is that the ladies are absent and the guys have just
Right.
sunk to an all new level. But it gives you a sense of his humour and artistic talent, and he actually followed that up with the Carbon Trading Blues released in 2008. So what about the offending poem by the same author that this national candidate shared and as a result effectively got told to disappear, or certainly wasn't defended by the National Party leadership? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'd like to read it to you. It's pretty offensive. It's called Enough is Enough. Those Muppets up in Wellington, they're at it once again. Our team of once 5 million is beginning to feel the strain. Labour's splitting up the country since old Winnie was stood down. Now it's Māori versus Pākehā and country versus town. Cindy's showing us her colours. We know why she chose red. She started out a communist and lately this has spread. Just as Hitler had the SS, our Prime Minister's on the job. She's given up on our police and bought the mongrel mob. James Shaw has let his guard down, which seemed to me bizarre. Made it plain he don't like farmers, especially if they're Pākehā. He'll dictate how we run our farms, and though people own their land, wants to claim and take parts from them his significant areas plan. The Environmental Minister has proved that he's a clown. In spite of logical opposition, said I won't be backing down. He reckons we'll grow pine trees instead of food. We'll all grow wood. So I've tried eating pine cones and they don't taste that good. Carbon credits are the future, David Parker staked. His claim will sell them to the airlines so that they can fly their planes. It's obvious to most of us carbon trading is a farce. I'd like to leave my carbon footprint on David Parker's, rhymes with farce. This land was built on hard work, greenies wouldn't understand. Now hugging trees is more important than getting dirty hands. Economy destroying terrorists, dragging workers to their knees. Governments blowing out budgets won't get paid by hugging trees. I well remember someone saying we won't bring a new tax, but the one they put on vehicles just broke the camel's back. Regulations thrust upon us trying to drag the country down. And since the last election, same old circus, just more clowns. The coronavirus hit us back in February last year, which brought us all together. For a while we lived in fear. Some countries liked our leader when she told us to be kind. So let the bees have her, because most of us won't mind. That's the offensive poem. That was a poem that was shared by someone who wanted to stand for Parliament, and as a result, they are no longer standing for Parliament. So now, just before we go to the panel, I just want to remind us all of this incident in 2012. A Labour MP who is now a senior cabinet minister in the Labour government, Megan Woods, apologised for comparing the National Party and John Key to Adolf Hitler over controversial legislation allowing partial asset sales. So panel, let's go round. Is National cancelling anyone because they're scared the media might attack rather than seeking to represent everyday Kiwis? And I guess part of that question is how many mistakes should a politician be allowed to make. So, Alfred, I'm going to start with you because you're the ex-politician, you're the expert here. How many mistakes are you allowed, and are we cancelling normal people with a sense of humour?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, it seems like the party's bought into the cancel culture. When you're reading through that, there was a liked poem, and in the full context of what it was saying, there's probably a lot of things that many people would agree about the current, or the previous Prime Minister as well. Yeah, how many times can he be cancelled? Well, the thing is that the bar used to be quite high about things that you could do, but to be honest, when you look at the Labour Party and the Greens, I mean, words that Marama Davidson's been able to get away with. She got away with saying the C word, and no one really said anything. You think about Julianne Genter, she used the F word, and they just said, oh, don't be a prude, just let them say what they say. So I just think that at the moment, there's a real challenge between conduct and behaviour. But in regards to this, I think it's making National look very weak when you've got a leader that's consistently apologising and disagreeing with so many of their party members and those in their caucus. I don't think it bodes well. I think that it affects the view on his leadership, that he, in a sense, has got a caucus out of control. And yet, people like Maureen Pugh, if you read through the detail, you would actually have to agree with her position. Joseph Mooney, when he was talking, I mean, Joseph needs to learn that actually social media is not a good place to articulate very sort of quintessential fine interpretations. Okay, leave that for another place to debate. But again, why would you turn around and say you disagree with him? Why don't you say the fact is that actually he's got a point of view and then support the view by giving a depth analysis about the point that he's trying to make? And that's, I think, a reflection of leadership.
Okay, Bruce, you're on the board of Family First, so you're in effect my boss. Would you be happy with me sharing that poem?
Of course, of course. One of the characteristics of a confident culture and a confident political party, for that matter, is that it can understand satire, even appreciate satire, and learn to laugh at itself, because human beings are, on the whole, a bit funny, and we need to laugh. And the inability to laugh and the inability to accept satire, although that poem hardly reaches the level of satire, but it nearly gets there, is good for us, because it helps us to understand why we're connected to the past. And one of the important failures, it would seem to me, of the present National Party is that it doesn't understand the importance of the past in determining what it should be thinking about the present, or indeed about the future. And the consequence of that is a failure to understand our humanity and laugh at ourselves. And that's a shame.
Okay. Ronji, did you find that poem offensive? Do you think he should have stood down?
Man, I actually love that poem and the song. Actually, I reckon you should probably grab him on for the panel and get a live interview with him. I mean, he's probably capturing the thoughts and understandings and experiences of a lot of New Zealanders that sort of feel disempowered and disenfranchised with what's happening. They don't have a voice. And so I thought the poem was excellent. I guess a couple of thoughts I have around this. Sometimes it sort of feels like a bit of a beat up on the National Party with this, with StraightTalk. And yet I have no idea about the inner workings of the party. But the more I see it, the more I see, as Alfred said, really weak leadership. I mean, Luxon's not backing his people to have an opinion, to make a stand. And so I just think walking those comments back, walking those positions back, not backing your team really doesn't show a leader that's willing to support and have the backs of his MPs. But I guess the second thought I had was, I've just been thinking about the state of those social conservative MPs in the party right now. Are they a little bit too scared to say anything in case they lose a position or portfolio or a ranking or something? And what is Luxon afraid of? What's the National Party's board and staffers? How do they handle this? I just think it just looks like a real mess. But again, there's not many other options out there.
Okay, and just before I come to you, Ashley, just this comment that came through from Sue, which I thought was quite relevant. Luxon is acting like a CEO rather than a leader of MPs that a good percentage have been voted in by their electorates. Those MPs are accountable to their electorates, whereas as he says, a lot of the MPs are accountable to the party. That's a problem with the system. But Ashley, back to you. There's always an issue when you bring in Hitler into anything, isn't there? Even in jest.
Yeah, there is. And I mean, I'm not offended by that poem at all. But there is, as appears to be my ongoing role on the panel, I've got a slightly different view to everybody else, or at least I've got a dollar each way on this. So on the one hand, the National Party's a brand, and it's a brand that has certain values that it adheres to. And when you sign up to become a candidate and hopefully be elected, you buy into those values and those brand values, and you agree to fit in with the guidelines in exactly the same way if you bought into a franchise of a business, that you would be required to adhere to the principles and the values of that business. And if you weren't prepared to do that, then actually that franchise could terminate your contract. So in a sense, I understand why the National Party might be saying to candidates, hey, look, you've agreed to do certain things, you haven't done them, you haven't complied with them, and therefore you either don't do it again, or in extreme cases you no longer meet our conditions and you're out, you're no longer a candidate. So I get that, and I actually have some support of that, because if you don't have some value base, then what's the point of having a party that's got sort of a collective ideology? Having said that, and this is where I agree with the rest of the panel, you could question where that ideology has gone over the last 5 or 6 years with National. It's gone from being pretty predictable, and I think 6 years ago everybody on this panel could have pointed to the key values of the party, to now being driven very much around electability and around being terrorised and frightened of the idea that they might do or say something that would impact on that sort of centre vote that can go either way in any given election. So on that basis, I agree with everybody else. We're in a situation at the moment where we're not showing leadership, we're poll-driven, and it's all about trying to get elected. But I do buy into the idea that the National Party is entitled to have some values, and it's entitled to actually have some rules around what its candidates can and can't say.
Okay, but in fairness, does that mean that you have to throw out your sense of humour and be a little bit edgy, like this was?
No, and that's what I mean when I say that's what I'm referring to when I say that you could then question where those values are currently at, and it's gone from being, in my view, a party that had some pretty clear conservative traditional principles to a party which, as I said before, is poll-driven and therefore wants to purge the party of anything that might upset somebody that might otherwise have voted for the National Party.
Okay, so the latest trend with public figures is that what we tend to do is we troll through their social media for the last 20 years, and every comment, every like, every share. And remember that this national candidate, he shared them. He didn't actually say them, he shared them. Is trolling, Alfred, I'll put this to you because obviously you would have had to take this into consideration as an ex-MP. Is trolling through social media from years ago fair game for someone standing for public office?
Well, one of the challenges from that is that people only take a piece of the pie, right? And then what they do, they inflate it, they embellish it, and it becomes bigger than what it really is. But can I just say that to comment on what was taken out in regards to the comparison to Hitler and the SS, you know, if you want to get into politics, you want to talk about that. Not only did you expose Megan Wood, but also too, you know, in politics we've got a record we can be proud of. But and Ashley will know this, but there's parts of it that we hang our heads in shame in regards to the Holocaust, to Hitler, to the way Jews were treated. I mean, in 1937, Walter Nash, who was then the Minister of Finance, signed a deal with Germany. He went over to Germany, and what he said was that this is an amazing country. They're thriving under the Hitler leadership. And in 1937, 1937, we shifted over, we exported 500 tons of butter, right? And he was also to the Minister of Immigration. And so we had about 1,100 Jews that were accepted as refugees into the country. Over 1,700 were rejected. When he was challenged about that, this is what he said in his own words around the Jews. He said, there are people that we would find very difficult to assimilate into our culture. Basically, he bought into the rhetoric around that. So the problem with trolling is that you only take a small piece of the pie, you don't tell the whole story. And unfortunately, that's what's becoming of the media and also to the commentary and narratives in our country.
Yeah, I mean, Ronji, would you be worried if we had a look through all your social media accounts? I mean, last week you said something about I had the most punchable face in New Zealand.
Well, that wasn't really satire. I was telling the truth. It wasn't satire. It was sort of my honest opinion. I should have made that my free speech moment, actually. But look, I guess it's just part of the game. I'm really fascinated about the politics of it. And I guess, Alfred, I don't know about how these parties work inside. Like, is it Luxon's decision? Is it the board's decision? What happens to these MPs? Are they too scared to speak out? Like, just it's not a good look. And I guess when I'm trying to encourage people to not vote for this current government, which I have, then the options out there aren't really good ones. And so, what's happening inside?
Well, if I can answer that question just quickly, Bob. Well, you only need to look at Louisa Wall, right? So I'm going to go to the other side because I don't just want to look like we're bashing up on National, right? But this is reflective of a lot of politics currently in our country. Louisa Wall was never promoted. Why? Because she stood up against Jacinda Ardern. And so you've got party politics that's thick and fast. It's all about popularity. It's all about the numbers. And Ashley said it's poll driven. Now that's going to be a real concern for our people. And that's where, the work of Family First is asking about what about our values? Can we vote for our values? Because at the moment, we have caucuses that are not making decisions that are the best for our country. And it's reflective on how they conduct their business internally amongst themselves. So, Ronji, the truth is that a lot of it is personality-driven, politics-driven. All the rhetoric about, I love the way they used to say in the caucus, oh, we're such a broad church. But the reality is they hated the church many times, right? They used to call me the God botherer because I had a Christian conservative faith. So it's really interesting. They use terminologies and quotes because they sound cool. They sound really cute. But the truth is they mean nothing at times when it really matters.
Yeah.
Bruce, I know that people have often trolled through what you have written and have looked for mistakes. How many mistakes are we allowed to make before we deserve to be cancelled?
Well, I can just say at the back of all that, there's an old saying, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And the social media aggravates that. Because it's always partial, it's always selective, and it makes a little knowledge more dangerous than it. In fact, it doesn't make it more dangerous. It just makes it seem more dangerous and more compelling. Really, it's a matter of building a tough skin and getting on with it.
So I mean that comes down to the question which I might just put to all of you just before we wrap up this issue, and that is, do we want perfect politicians who have never made a mistake, or do we want ones that actually have made mistakes? Sometimes they've been buffoons, sometimes they have posted something inappropriate or offensive, but at the same time they've apologised, unlike Marama Davidson. They have apologised and we see them as being real. Bruce, do you think we deserve real politicians like that? Because I think we're scaring off people.
We do. Well, because if everyone makes mistakes, and you can do things with a mistake, you can hide it or you can admit it, ask for forgiveness and get on with the job. And everyone's task then is to get on with it. And the problem with the kind of thinking that seems to be permeating our culture at the moment is an unwillingness to forgive people who say things that you don't like. And so you cancel them, and the willingness to sort of let things go and let things be past if people say they're sorry seems to be almost impossible in many cases. It's a loss of an understanding of human weakness and a willingness to accept that we're all vulnerable, we're all fragile, we've all got difficulties, but people who move forward from that and accept that become stronger, and it's the stronger people we want. Those people, we don't want Pharisees in Parliament, we want people who are redeemed.
Ashley, you got anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty astute sort of an observation.
Okay. Ronji?
I think we just need real MPs who are real people and not robots. I think all this cookie cutter kind of safe MP is a little bit boring. I'd rather see real people who've made mistakes, who've gone through life and don't have all the degrees for Africa, but they just are real life people in different sectors, different backgrounds, different upbringings and so on.
Okay. And Alfred, anything to add just as we finish this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not the mistakes that we've made, but it's the lessons we've learned along the way. But how's that shaped the character of, the leadership, and it should reflect itself in the decisions that they've made heading into the future. Because the proof is in the pudding, right? It's the actions that count, rather than just the words that they speak.
Okay, and John actually says that. He says, I think mistakes are meant to help us grow, but they are not displaying growth. And Trina says, gosh, it's going to be impossible to vote for a party that holds my beliefs and conservative values. Well, hopefully we can figure out who that is. And, okay, that was just a response that we made. Yep, they're creating a culture where people are too scared to say what they believe, which is true. All right, let's move on. Education and the two major party policies we want to have a look at, because the two major parties, well, one of them is going to appoint the next Minister of Education. So let's just have a look at Labor first. They've just announced that they're going to give schools a temporary alternative to the new online literacy and numeracy tests that many teenagers apparently have found too hard. The government is facing pressure to address the downward trend in students' achievement in maths and literacy. The Minister of Education has already said she's not happy with it, and it's deferring major NCEA changes so schools can concentrate on, guess what, team? Maths, reading and writing. Woo! The announcement followed a series of trials with Year 10 students that found that many did not know how to use capital letters and full stops, and didn't know there was 60 minutes in an hour. But I do want to show you the ultimate goal of what the Ministry of Education and this current government is pushing, this type of curriculum. And Bruce, you may need to interpret it for us. This is their new plan for teaching both maths and literacy. Let's have a look at it. A critical maths how do you say that? Pedagogical, is it?
Pedagogies.
Yeah, thanks. Approach uses maths to develop critical awareness about wider social, environmental, this is maths, remember, political, ideological and economic issues. Critical maths recognises the importance of understanding, interpreting and addressing issues of power, social justice and equity in the community and the wider world. Akonga are encouraged to interrogate dominant discourses and assumptions, including that maths is benign, neutral and culture free. Whew, that is maths. The literacy isn't much better. Can we just show what the ACT Party did in response? They said that their policy would be 1 + 1 = 2 in response to that policy from Labor. Bruce, could you just explain what that was all about? Because I have no idea. Bruce isn't there. He's gone.
Bruce,
okay,
Bruce
look,
he's been wrapped.
he's obviously passed out.
He's been raptured. He's been raptured. Oh,
Houdini.
Bruce,
my machine went odd.
Oh, did it? Did you hear that pedagogy or whatever it's called?
No.
Oh, okay. We'll come back to you. Ashley, what's your thoughts on it?
Oh, so again, I'm really conscious that I sort of feel always offside. Some of this I don't have a problem with. So I was going through this, particularly these proposed approaches under the new curriculum. And look, you're right, Bob. So at a basic level, math should be empirical, which means it's about facts that are not disputed. Literacy less so. There's an argument that says with literacy and comprehension and things around language that there is an element of subjectivity in it, and it is actually appropriate to kind of analyse that and drill down. So particularly in that space, that subjective space, I don't have a problem with going beyond the words and actually looking at what they mean. And I mean, I would argue, I think with some degree of credibility, that if you look back over the last 40 or 50 years, that the prevailing orthodoxy around education in this country came from and I'm probably going to upset half the viewers by saying this, but from an imperial perspective. So it was a British view of interpretation of these things. So in essence, I actually don't have too much of an issue with that, particularly when it comes to language. But yeah, you're right. There's too much focus, and ACT have captured it really, really clearly with that 1 + 1 = 2. Because what they're saying is, hey, look, that stuff's great, that stuff's fine, but let's get back to the basics of education, which are about educating our kids.
Yeah, and I think that's been the concern because, I mean, for example, if you look at the relationship and sexuality education curriculum, they want that embedded in every subject topic, maths, English, social studies, PE, everywhere they can. Ronji, what was your response to that? Could you understand it?
I just thought that was a whole bunch of woke BS, to be honest. Like, I think that's coming straight out of the critical race theory playbook. which came out in the 70s and 80s in the US. It came out of critical legal studies. It's sort of morphed into cultural Marxism and what's happening today. And I just thought when you're adding ideology and bias in terms of what you're teaching our kids, you're actually teaching them what to think rather than teaching them how to think. And that's not what critical race theory really is about. It's actually teaching them about victims and oppressors, about white privilege, about all that kind of other kind of woke BS, to be honest. I think if you look at one of the standing Ministry of Education strategies, it's called Te Huri Hanganui. And if you have a good look at that, it's absolutely woke critical race playbook stuff. You've got the Unteach Racism app that's out there for the teachers as well to sort of self-reflect on their own racism. I just think this stuff is really destructive. It actually doesn't bring people together, because one of the key things about critical race theory is it keeps people divided in the intersectionalities between victim and oppressor. And because I'm a brown person, I'm a victim, and everyone who's white is my oppressor. So I thought the whole thing that Labour's doing, not just in terms of their useless announcements recently, but also in terms of what they've been doing for the last 2 terms, in terms of the curriculum, I think is absolutely destructive for our young people.
Yep, and actually Family First has a very good explanation of what Ronji just talked about, criticaltheory.nz. Go to criticaltheory.nz and it's all explained there, exactly what Ronji said. Alfred, should we be concerned? I mean, should we not be concerned like Ashley's suggesting, or we should be?
I'm trying to express, to be totally animated about this. And I disagree with what Ashley's saying. This has got to be the greatest concern from us, because what Ronji said is absolutely right. This is coming straight out of the playbook of Paulo Freire, for instance. He was a Brazilian philosopher and educationalist. This is all about basically power struggles. It's teaching our kids, rather than 1 + 1 = 2, which is what mathematics is meant to be about, it's teaching them how to critique and challenge power struggles. My goodness, Bob. We're meant to be teaching kids to equip them for life, not to turn around and all of a sudden become the oppressed and the victim. I mean, for goodness, we have to wake up. We've got to wake people up to this. We can't just turn around and sort of be passive and say, oh, well, it's a matter of words and so forth. No way. This is about as bad as you can get. You know, we're now trying to teach our kids about, rather than mathematics, you're trying to teach this. This has come straight out of a Marxist ideology around liberation. Why are we trying to teach kids that, right? No wonder we're going to go through some difficulties and challenges. And I just really believe conservative parents that are out there need to speak out strongly so much about this. Take your rights under tomorrow's schools, where you have a right to be able to consult, speak out against it, understand how devastating this sort of policy can be. And I just think that we've got to get animated. We can't stand quiet on this. We've got to turn around and absolutely challenge everything about this. This is about as communist and Marxist as you can get.
Okay, Ashley, right of reply.
Oh, only this stuff cuts both ways. I mean, if you read the actual wording in the opening of this thing, and it talks in both math and English about identifying the purpose of texts and how authors construct them to achieve that purpose, that ship sails in both directions. You get a national government in, that goes exactly the other way. It starts talking about focusing on what's bad about wokeism and the other stuff. So yeah, I take your point, guys, but the language is such that it's fluid enough that whoever's in power and whatever their prevailing ideology is, it flows in the other direction. So I'm not as animated. I think it's a Trojan horse.
Okay, Bruce, you're conscious again. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, after listening to Ronji and Alf, I'm encouraged to quote something like J.S. Mill. This is a minor rant.
Okay.
I want to quote this, because people can look it up and see it. J.S. Mill was an 18th century British philosopher, by the way, sometimes called the father of utilitarianism. Anyway, here's what he said. A general state education is a mere contrivance for moulding people to be exactly like one another. And as the mould in which it casts them is that which pleases the predominant power in the government, whether this be a monarch, a priesthood, an aristocracy, or the majority of the existing generation, in proportion as it is sufficient and successful, it establishes a despotism over the mind, leading by natural tendency to one over the body. Now, I think we've got to the stage now where education has become more propaganda than instruction. And of course we're in decline. I mean, it was captured first, I think, by the All Must Have Prizes Brigade, which, by the way, is a quote from Alice in Wonderland. By the way, just while I'm on the topic of Alice in Wonderland, I read it yesterday again. Wonderful, read it. But anyway, and then the All Must Have Prizes Brigade was followed by the cultural relativism people, that is, all cultures are equal, and civilization must be cancelled. And finally, the identity politics and self-realization that Ronji was talking about. So the purpose of education has changed from the passing on of knowledge, which I used to think it happened, to the uncharted discovery of self-knowledge. Pupils and students are left without adequate guidance. Put them all in a big room and let them pour their ignorance.
Okay, now that was very good, Bruce. Ashley, you did mention about Nationals policy, so let's just move on to that. Christopher Luxon has announced Nationals education policy. The aim is 80% of Year 8 students, so that's end of intermediate school before going to high school, being at or above the expected curriculum level for their age in reading, writing, maths and science. By 2030, New Zealand students to the top 10 in the world in maths, reading and science. And how they're going to do that? They're going to require all primary and intermediate schools to provide at least an hour of reading, an hour of writing and an hour of maths on average every day. I mean, I don't know how they're going to fit in the sex education. Require standardised, robust assessment at least twice a year in reading, writing and maths. And detailed reports will be given to parents, hopefully so that they can understand it. Does that sound better, Alfred?
Yeah, well, the Back to Basics campaign that they've launched really is another way of national standards dressed differently. And look, the thing about national standards, whether people loved it or leaved it, what it did do is that it actually meant that we'd made the system more accountable to parents, as well as to children, and also to the results that needed to be achieved. So from my perspective, it's better than what we currently have. And to me, making greater levels of accountability, especially for Māori Pacifica. I mean, we've heard a lot of talk about, the achievement rates, and I just think there needs to be a better system. And so I think there's a tick for heading in the right direction. Still don't know what the detail looks like. And the last thing is that the thing that teachers and administrators hate the most is that constant change that churns over every political cycle.
Yeah, and Alfred, unfortunately, Christine isn't here to comment on this, but Erica Stanford was interviewed about this whole issue, and it seems like the theory is there, but there wasn't a lot of meat. There was lots of everything should be mandatory reporting of absentees and etc., but there wasn't a lot of meat of how you get to that high standard, was there?
Yeah, I mean, she was trying to quote Astle, and there was the interview that on Q&A with Jack Tame. And that's one of the troubles when you just you go along and make a few visits, you sort of put together a policy, and then you try to go out and communicate it. Look, you have to take time to understand the detail because it's complex, it's challenging. And you can't just try and be like the car salesman, get out there and I can sell this brand new car because it looks good, smells good. But when people who are mechanics ask you the detail and you can't tell them what's under the hood, how it actually operates under certain conditions, then you get trapped. And I think that's where her Q&A got the same thing too.
Ashley?
It comes back again to what we talked about before. I get the impression good policy, don't get me wrong, says all the right stuff, but you get a really deliberative impression from it that, again, it's poll-driven, and that even the language is that it's almost as if they've tested words to see what's going to get the best reaction and sway voters in the right direction. So, and I get why they do that, but Alfred's right, it's got to be backed up by something that's actually got some real meat to it, and at the moment, it sounds more to me about what sounds right than what actually is right.
But Ashley, when you say poll-driven, isn't it what parents want? Because, I want my kids to be taught reading, writing and arithmetic. I don't want them to be panicked about climate alarmism and told that they have 200 genders to choose from.
And that's the definition of being poll-driven. It's about saying things that people want to hear, because you're right, because the vast bulk of people actually just want their kids to be educated properly. Look, and I would make the point too, I was going to make it before, and Ronji's made it a couple of times, we need to be careful in this forum not to be sounding like we're just beating up on the National Party, because there seems to be a lot of, every time we answer a question, it's to say how badly National are doing it. But I think I'm right in saying for all of us that that's because we're passionate about these guys actually getting it right. And our concern at the moment is that to the extent that they're losing the support of part of the electorate because of some of the stuff that we're highlighting, those are areas that could be fixed. There's still enough time between now and the election to actually get this stuff right.
Yeah, I'd just like to remind us that Bruce last week could not find a single good thing to say about our last Prime Minister. So, just to put that...
Very cool, yeah.
Ronji, what do you think, especially for Pacifica and Māori, what do they need? What is an education system that's going to work for them?
Well, I think the basics that are found in this National Party policy is what all kids need, including Māori and Pacifica. So I think the bones of the policy is, I sort of agree with what the other panelists are saying, but I think I would have loved to see more detail in the policy. Like, there's no real discussion there around curriculum changes. There's no real discussion around school choice. There's no real discussion around the success of charter schools or special character schools or religious schools around the country. And there's no real discussion in the policy around homeschooling. So I think those kinds of details are what a lot of New Zealand families, New Zealand parents are looking for and wanting to understand a bit more. And so we need more meat on those bones. But I guess it's the basics. So going back to the basics is important. But yeah, it is a nice sounding promotional kind of social media cool sounding policy that doesn't really tell us the meat of what we need to understand for our kids.
Yep, and just finally, Bruce, I mean, you've been involved in the education sector for, 60 years. I mean, you must have seen major change.
Yes, of course, the change is dramatic. But there's one point I think we should note, that ministers of education don't determine education policy. All the ministers of education that I dealt with over my little life hardly knew anything about education. They were driven by a small clique of people in the ministry who were ideologically driven and wanted education to go in a particular direction, the direction that we're now complaining about. So that what we do need to do is to try and get people to understand and bring about a change, because the curriculum and the data and all the stuff around the curriculum is embarrassing. It's so badly written, it's incoherent, and it's so much driven by an ideology that has no substance that I don't know how the fellows in Wellington can write it without being embarrassed, running away and hiding. It's so bad.
Okay, any final comments, team? We're going to move on. Okay, and before we do our next topic, we just have a very important quick word from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Walt Heyer. I'm looking forward to coming to New Zealand and talking about the issues around transgenderism, because I lived a life. In fact, I started cross-dressing myself as a 4-year-old boy, and we need to know more about how to protect our children from going through these awful hormone procedures that are totally unnecessary and the surgeries that destroy their life, because all we're doing is devaluing, dehumanizing, and destroying young people's lives, and that must stop. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Lila Rose with Live Action, and I'm so excited to get to speak to you at Forum on the Family coming up in June. We're going to talk about the importance of fighting for life, whether it's in New Zealand or here in the United States, and how together, if we are convicted and passionate and willing to stand up for the truth and stand up for the preborn child and their parents, we can change our countries and our culture. Excited to see you there.
I'm Kevin Sabet. I'm the president and CEO of Smart Approaches to Marijuana and also the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions. I'm super excited to come down to Auckland in June for the Family Forum. And I am a former 3-time White House drug policy advisor, most recently in the Obama administration, where I led efforts on the drug policy strategy and also with regards to cannabis and marijuana use. And it's very important people understand that we're not talking about the marijuana of old. We're talking about a massive new industry that really wants to addict our kids and is only looking to profit. And that's what I worry about with regards to efforts to commercialize and legalize cannabis globally.
All right, so that is forumonthefamily.nz. It's on the 29th and 30th of June, and go to forumonthefamily.nz and register. The registrations are pouring in. It's going to be a great day. And we've also got the ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Australia speaking at a special gala dinner on the Thursday night before the forum. So forumonthefamily.nz. Right, team, last topic for tonight. A recent survey was done on not on whether we trust the media, but the perception of media bias amongst the main media outlets in New Zealand. It was done by Courier Market Research, who actually enjoy reasonable media coverage of their polling, except when it's polling that we've commissioned, ironically. But Courier asked 1,000 people how they regarded the major 8 outlets' coverage of politics, whether it was strongly left-leaning, somewhat left-leaning, neutral, somewhat right-leaning, or strongly right-leaning. Let's just have a look at that graph. And you'll see there that the New Zealand Herald is considered the most balanced of 8 media outlets when it comes to political coverage, according to the poll. Out the far left, Stuff, One News and the Spin-Off are considered the most left-leaning in that order, followed by News Hub and then Radio New Zealand. News Talk ZB is seen as the most right-wing leaning, followed by the Platform. Now, Courier David Farrer said if you look at the breakdown by how people say they will vote, National and ACT voters thought the Herald actually leaned left, while Labour and Green voters thought the Herald leaned right, so a bit of variation. Farrer also said it is little surprise that New Zealanders saw News Talk ZB and the Platform as leaning right, because that is common for talk radio, tends to lean right. And he also said, which is what I said, it's worth noting that possibly ZB's perception is more on the hosts rather than the newsroom, because actually my argument is that the News Talk ZB newsroom is actually left-leaning. And I think that was all the points that he made. Even Labour and Green voters, left-wing voters, saw Stuff as leaning left. So Stuff are hopeless at hiding their left-wing bias. So let's just go around the panel. Any surprises in the survey? Is it accurate? And then I'll come back to you and get your news. So Bruce, let's start with you. Any surprises in that survey?
Well, no, there weren't any surprises. I thought it was what I would have expected, except that maybe I would have thought that it's a bit more left-leaning, the news outlets that weren't so left-leaning as I thought they were. But other than that, I thought it was a very useful survey.
Okay, Ashley, any surprises?
Yeah, not really. Same thing. I mean, if you'd asked me to pick the 2 right-wing media organisations, I would have pointed to the Herald and to News Talk ZB, particularly News Talk ZB. So I think that's a pretty good summation. Radio New Zealand Stuff very much on the left. It's driven by an ideology. So no huge surprises there. And overall, the only one surprise I'll take that back. Well, the one surprise I did have is that it gave the impression of a more balanced media than would have been my view. My view is that there's a strong bias toward the left overall if you look at the totality of them. Okay,
I mean the takeout of it was that the New Zealand Herald probably could take their hat off because they were basically opposed by both sides, so that would suggest that they're getting the balance right.
Yeah.
Or some sort of balance. Yeah.
Ronji,
do you read the newspaper?
No, I don't. Actually, I try and avoid the news as much as possible. I have to read it for work, so there you go. But I didn't find it that surprising. I guess I've said it a few times on this platform because I know that there's a whole bunch of wealthy people that are watching. But it sort of, for me, shows the gap that of an alternative news source for a centre-right kind of audience. And so maybe the platform and other groups are trying to fill that with podcasts and radio shows and so on. But I just think there's a gap there that no one's effectively filled, and people that want to get their news from somewhere else other than the left-leaning media.
Yeah, and there is a new one, Reality Check Radio, as well, with Peter Williams and Rodney Hyde and others. So that's a new one that seems to have fit into the gap. Bruce, did I ask you, Bruce?
Well, you did. Yes, you did. But
okay. I'll come back.
We don't have a right-wing conglomerate sort of. We don't have a conservative rump in New Zealand to give us a coherent and intelligent right-wing media. It's just we just don't have the wherewithal to do that. That doesn't seem.
Alfred, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I first of all just want to comment on what Ashley said, is that this is not about beating up National or even Labour. Mm-hmm. It's actually about having robust conversations and critiquing all parts of the political system. And in saying that, referring to this whole issue around the media, I think there's a real concern. I'm taking another perspective because we keep doing left and right, right and left, and we keep trying to pigeonhole us into different positions. Look, I strongly believe we need to change the narrative. It's no longer about left and right. What it is about what's right and wrong. It's about values-driven perspectives, and I think that's what Ronji's trying to say. They're giving people now the appetite is they want leadership that's value-driven. It has a real sense of consciousness about decisions that people make and how they impact and affect our countries. You know, trusted institutions of parliament now are losing that ability to have trustworthiness. Politicians, parliament, and even politics itself. So whether it's the media outlets themselves, they're often driven, and just a reflection on some of these, they're often personalities. I mean, Newstalk CB, you know, you've got Hoskins, you've got a number there, and same with the platform. Can I lastly say this, is that if we're truly a diverse country, why are we not reflecting some of the other forms of mediums to different parts of our communities, like Māori, Pacifica Radio and print? I mean, huge Asian populations, Indo-Asian, who are using different forms of connectivity, but all we seem to keep printing is mainstream. And I think that we should be challenging Korea and others. How about stretching the 10 pegs a little bit further, asking questions to different parts of our community, because this is not us totally inside the tent here.
Yeah, and a classic example of that is that, you know, we're aware of a Tongan online station that's on Facebook virtually every day, and so we translated our sex education warning parent guide thing into Tongan. That was played on air to the families, and of course now the Tongan community are up in arms because they've finally just figured out what's actually being taught to their kids in New Zealand schools, and they're very upset. So it's an example of how we can reach into some of these smaller areas of media that are reaching target audiences. So team, I do just want to finish. We've got -1 minute. Basically, just for the viewers, where do you get your news? Who do you trust? What are your top sites? We'd just like a quick recommendation. What's your normal process for getting your feed of news? Bruce, do you want to kick us off here?
Well, I don't trust very many in New Zealand. I like things like the BFD and a few others, but I try to get my understanding from the conflict that exists between the Guardian in the UK and the Telegraph. I like reading both of those and getting some kind of balance in what's going on in the world. I mean, it's not only those two, but they do as an illustration.
And so for those who don't know, the Guardian is very left and the Telegraph is very right, isn't it? So yes. That would be like Fox News and CNN, reading both of those, getting both sides of the debate.
Well, something like that.
Yeah, okay. Ronji, do you, or do you just go down to the local ice cream shop?
No, look, in terms of news, NRL.com, NBA.com, UFC.com, BoxingNow.com. Look, I only check out the news because I have to, and I try and avoid mainstream media as much as possible. So if it comes to sports stuff, I know every single thing that's up there, but yeah, that's me. Okay, but if there was breaking news, where would you go and check it out? Probably News Talk, try and get a little bit of balance, and maybe New Zealand Herald, but I try to look to overseas sites as well, just to get a different perspective. Okay. Ashley, you would be what, Hawke's Bay Today?
No. Hey, by the way, just on that, Ronji, the Warriors are playing the Broncos at McLean Park in Napier on the 27th of May. So if that's where you get your sources, come down. Hey, so
well, I'm not a Warriors supporter. That's the problem.
No, fair call. Don't then. So I actually get mine informally curated by social media, particularly LinkedIn. By which I mean that I've got a particular sort of follower on LinkedIn. And so I look at the stuff that they dish up because it generally is the sort of stuff that I would have to go looking for myself. So that pretty much provides me with most of the stuff that ticks the boxes that I want. So I don't generally go to the media. I look for what comes through LinkedIn from other people that are on that same site that I'm connected to, and that gives me a reasonably sort of accurate barometer of what's going on at any particular point in time. Yeah, and same for me. I do it on Twitter where I follow newspapers, but I try to follow a broad cross range, and so you see the same story coming through, but there are different things that they're highlighting. So you start to get a balance, but also it corroborates what you're hearing, so you don't just get a grand story that's been literally made up to grab your attention, and you realise
well, nobody else is reporting it, so obviously something's not quite right here. You can check it out. Alfred, just finally, where would you recommend?
Yeah, look, I'm like Ashley and others. I mean, I more or less follow a theme, but rather than the breaking of the news, I like to see the reactions of people. So I'm actually following different threads of actually how people respond, what are the different comments, especially people who are local, and try to understand what their perspective is and what's happening. So some of it will come through social media, come through reels, and people sort of who are online, like when just where you guys are, actually with Cyclone Gabriel, for instance, hearing what's happening on the ground. I think that's the sort of stuff that's more important. And then just looking behind some of the stuff. I like to go offshore too, and I'm probably more of a Fox sort of sport rather than CNN, but at the same time too, you listen to Al Jazeera, right, because you want to hear different food. Then you listen to the Jerusalem Times, and so I think it's healthy to go onshore, offshore, to try and balance your perspectives globally. And so to me, none of these outlets I sort of particularly trust, but I do hear, then I just try and do my own research, and that's what I'd encourage other people. Put together a way of, and it's your networks, I think, that make the difference. People you can talk to who are trusted, who've got feet on the ground, and who understand what's actually happening.
Okay, we've got to go, guys, because Ronji Manukau McDonald's shuts in half an hour, so he's got to go. So thank you, everybody. You've done it great tonight. The ladies will be back next Monday night, so the quality will improve a lot. That's just a word of encouragement for our viewers. So we will be back next Monday night at 8 o'clock for Straight Talk. Of course, tomorrow, a special day, Anzac Day, lest we forget. Good night.
Yeah.